Hello, I am Yadira, and this is my episode on the world according to Chris.
Without further ado, I want to introduce to some and present to others Miss Yadira Dowling. Miss Yadira, how are you today? I'm so happy to have you on.
Thank you, Chris. I am so happy to be here. I'm doing great.
Awesome. Well, listen, I don't want to spoil it because there's a lot that I got to share. I've got like a whole page full of notes sitting here in front of me. But let's start with some of the basics so that everybody can understand you and know why you're here. Tell us, where you grew up, where you're from. Give us the family background, children, husband, all of that stuff, and then we're gonna dive right into it because I think most people will get get a lot of gems out of this conversation. So the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself.
Sure thing. So, I am an immigrant girl. I was born in the Dominican Republic, and my parents decided to move our family, to New York City when I was 10 years old. So, I say I'm Dominican born, Bronx raised, and I've spent most of my life in New York City, even though now I am raising my children near Miami, Florida. I am married of almost 17 years to the love of my life, and we have three children. Josiah is 13, Joshua is 11, and Eden is 7. And they are my fuel. They drive everything I do on a daily basis.
So this is we did not rehearse this. My oldest son's name is Joshua. He is 17. He will be 18 in March. My youngest son is Josiah. He will be 17 in December. This is absolutely hilarious. No coincidences, right?
We needed to chat. See, the universe brings us together. We have a blessing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's do this. You know, for those listening, you have such a very powerful story. I want to kind of start with tell everybody what you do today, and then let's talk a little bit about, almost 15, 16 years ago. What were you doing? What was kind of going on? And just kind of share a little bit about, where you are today. And I think the biggest thing that I'm really curious about is um, there's a portion of your story that I find pretty fascinating of some moments that you've experienced that I think there's many throughout America who have since potentially moved on from that particular day, but
Mhm.
you know what it's like because you were there firsthand. So tell everybody what you do today, just really quickly.
Yes, so I am a strategic planner, and what that person does is I help develop the ads. So I work at an ad agency. I've been working at an ad agency for almost 20 years, and I am responsible for the consumer insights, the consumer knowledge that comes into the agency in order for us to be able to do the creative work that we do. It all comes through me, and it is all done from my department. So that is what I do today. Now, my career did not start that way. I went ahead and got a bachelor's degree in management, organizational behavior management. So, still interested in that psychology, but from organizations and corporation perspective. Through that coursework, I fell in love with marketing, and that's how I ended up doing what I do today. But my first job straight out of college was finance, and it was actually at the World Trade Center. So even though I was looking for a finance job back then, I couldn't. I was looking for a marketing job, and back then I couldn't find one at an ad agency. So I took a finance job because I knew, as a fresh out of college kid, I just wanted to learn an industry, and I wanted to be in the real world and learn how corporations work and how people work. What this American system was like as an adult. So that's why I took the World Trade Center job first.
So this is pretty cool. So what year did you start at the World Trade Center?
It was 2000. So I am the graduating class of 2000. And I was there August of 2000 is when I started. And I stayed there for 2 years. So a year, when I had just made a year at work, the towers fell. So that happened in 2001. So now almost 21 years ago today.
Yeah.
And
So let's talk about some of the things like you first learned. Like what were some of the things that like that made you go, I like this, but there's more. Like what were some of the things that just intrigued you at that time as far as that world and the journey you were in?
so as a young person trying to figure out what work life is going to be like, because that's basically where we all are when we graduate college or when we step into the real world. It's like you've gotten through the course of work, you've gotten through, schooling, but you don't really know in theory if you like what you studied until you practice it. So I knew I enjoyed marketing, and I was working with a headhunter and told me there is some marketing in this position. You are going to have to create documents in order to market what the team does. And I thought, great, I'll give it a try. It's good pay. It was life coming to fruition as my parents had imagined it. The reason they moved us was for better education, better job opportunities. So here I was, just graduated college, gave them the degree, and I could figure out what this life was going to be like. And that's what I stepped into, understanding that this may not have been a perfect fit, but I was willing to learn and try it because it could have been. And as I was doing the work, I realized a couple of things. One, that within 6 months, I was not driven, like I was not excited to be there and to do the things that I was being paid to do. And at that point, I think my employer noticed it too, because they wanted to introduce to me the idea of becoming a broker. I used to help insurance brokers sell their insurance. And this is corporate insurance, so it is not consumer type of insurance. It's directors and officers and all that kind of stuff. If you insure, like if you work with your fingers and you need to insure your fingers, that's the type of insurance we were selling. And I just didn't love it. And I was able to check in with myself, and I've done this throughout life, to realize this is not it. I don't want to spend a lot more time if I already figure out and my body's telling me that this is not it. So that's when I started looking at graduate schools. And I started looking at my options. There were options in New York. There were options in Florida. I ended up going to VCU, the VCU Brand Center. It was a great mix, and it offered strategic planning, which the other schools I was looking at didn't. And, that's how I realized this is quite not the place for me. This is a great first step. I've learned a lot. I got the work experience. I see what adulting is, and now it's time to refocus and invest in myself. I started putting my ducks in a row and saving for graduate school, all of that, when I figured out that was not the place for me. And that was within 6 months, I think, and by the way, that's my rule for current work, for dating, like within 6 months, that's my overall.
That's good. That's good. So let's fast forward. I want to dive into this discussion because I think there's some very powerful lessons in some of the things that you experienced working at the World Trade Center. I want to go to September 11th. Let's start at the beginning of the day. Where were you headed? What was happening, and kind of like help our audience understand the perspective of what happened that day. We all know what happened, but give us your experience of how did your day start, and what was happening when you realized that honestly the world was changing and you were at the epicenter of what was going on. Hey, did you know that as employees, there are 7 big mistakes that we are all making before getting fired, downsized, or laid off? And I wanted to share those with you and teach you how to level up in your career. You can get that by going to www.twac.live/7 mistakes. You and I have been making some egregious mistakes when it comes to our career, and we got to stop making them. I want to provide you with this context, things that I have learned throughout my career that are going to help you. So go to the website, twac.live/7 mistakes, put in your name and email address, and download this free PDF that'll teach you of things that you and I can stop doing and start leveling up our career. Back to the episode.
I like to say, like, let me tell you how I'm still here. And it's truly, to me, divine providence. I couldn't explain it any other way. as many of you know and may remember, it was election day in New York City. And we had every workplace allows you 30 minutes either at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day for you to go and exercise your right to vote. So I decided I'm going to vote first and then go to work. So my dad drops me off at the voting place. When I enter into this voting place, now, mind you, I voted here before. That day, they couldn't find my records. They sent me to every single table at that location. They couldn't find, none of the tables could find my record for me to vote. So they asked me to sit down and do a manual ballot. So I had to, write everything in and color everything in. At this point, I'm like, this is such a pain. Like, but whatever, I'm going with the flow. I have the time, so I did it. Not knowing, and only in hindsight do we appreciate that they didn't find my records, and that's why I'm here today. So I get on the train. I'm late, so the stress level is rising, but it is what it is. And when we get down to Cortlandt Street, my train does not open its doors. They didn't tell us why. I was on the subway for about an hour, and none of us knew why the delays. There's often a delay in New York City. Somebody gets sick, so not a big deal. But they're not communicating what is happening in the towers, and I think it was to not have everybody panic underground. So the conductor says they're going to open in Cortlandt Street. We get to Cortlandt Street and it slows down, but it does not open the doors, and the train just keeps going. So I'm like, you can imagine New Yorkers. People started cursing and saying all kinds of stuff. This is now like 9:30, let's say. The things have just happened. The towers have just, both planes have hit. My tower was the second one, and that tower got hit at 9:18. So I had just missed it. When the train stops on the next stop, I still don't know. So I get out and I'm trying to look for where the towers are so that I can figure out how I'm going to walk there. And that's when I realized the towers are on fire. And there's a bunch of people. I was on Broadway, a bunch of people in the streets. And immediately my thought is, I need to call my parents because they're going to think I'm there. And I
Now, what
start
floor did you work on in that particular tower?
100th floor. And the way you got up there, and I remember asking this when I interviewed, in case of an emergency, how do we get down from here? And they were like, the stairs. And I'm like, y'all don't got a slide or something? Like, you got to be kidding me. The stairs from the 100th floor, it's unimaginable. And she said, the girl said, no, we go down the stairs, and there are fire drills because remember, an emergency had happened earlier in the 90s. So they had rehearsed for situations like this. We had two elevators that we had to take up every day to go up to work. The first elevator went to like the 72nd or 78th floor, and that was an express elevator. And then from there, you took a local elevator to take you to the particular floor if you were above 78. So that was the how I got to work every day. Yeah.
So, man, when you understood what was happening, when you here you are, you're downtown. The first thought is, well, let me call my parents so they know where I am. Were you able to get through on cell phones?
No,
You
I
were
had to
not
make
able to get through on cell phones.
Nope. I immediately pulled out my cell phone. It's not working, no signal. So I have to make a line. We still have payphones back then.
That's
We were
right.
right? So I'm like, there's a line to the payphone. I'm going to do that. And there was a line because obviously everyone else was trying to do the same. And on that line is when I learned that this was a deliberate accident, that it was not an accident.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
I was like, what happened? Whatever. I'm looking. I'm like, I guess I don't have to go to work today anymore. But let me call my dad. And in the line with people talking, like a plane just hit the towers, in both towers at that time. And I'm like, oh, so this was on purpose. And people were like, yeah. And
Wow.
that happened. I was able to get on the phone with my dad. He was very thankful. I just told him I didn't make it into the building. I'm outside. I was going on vacation after that weekend, and I said I'm gonna go shopping for a few things that I'm missing. So I'm gonna go further north, and that's the last conversation I had with my dad for that day until I saw him. And
Wow.
at that time, I started walking closer to the towers to see if I found any of my coworkers. because I expected them to be outside in the street. So I'm like, oh, let me go see. It's a company of almost 1,000 people,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So I'm like, I can go see. And as I was getting closer, my tower fell, and I was in the middle of the street. I didn't know what was happening. I thought they're bombing Manhattan. And I said a prayer. I said, God, whatever it is, I'm in your hands. And I just ran across the street. I was trying to get into like any store, any open door, to be able to escape whatever was happening outside. And I couldn't find a place. I saw men crouching down in like little pockets in between buildings. And I saw a light from a rotating door in the building 60 Broadway. I'll never forget that building. I went into the rotating door to escape because you couldn't see anything. And I sat on the floor and I started crying, and people were like, "Don't worry, you're gonna be okay." First of all, I think I looked just like super young, and there was a school near there. So some folks, I had a backpack because I was going to work out after work, and I was wearing my tennis shoes. So I think they thought I was one of the students. And one older gentleman was consoling me, like, "You're gonna be okay. Don't worry, you're gonna be fine." And I just couldn't just grasp the horror of the moment, and if I was really safe. Like, I didn't, for the first time, I didn't feel physically safe, and that's not supposed to happen. I'm just going to work. So in that building, they had a morning meeting. They had a few things left over, and they asked, said, help yourselves. If you're hungry, you need water, help yourself to what is there. We cannot leave until the mayor releases us. And it was hours. I was in there hours. There were no phones. I couldn't call my family back. I couldn't communicate with anybody else to let them know that I was there, that I was safe, that I didn't go to where I said I would go. And when we were released later that afternoon, I had to walk through the FDR. If you know New York City, I walked like 50 blocks or more up to 50th Street, from the World Trade up to 50th Street, because the trains were not running downtown. And on 50th, I was able to take a train home. I didn't get to my house until 5 p.m. or between 5:30 p.m. And then had the white dust, because that's what I was caught in the middle of. And that's when I saw my parents. My mom had been at work, so you can imagine, like, when she saw me, she started crying, even though I was fine. But the fact that she now was physically able to see
Yeah.
me and hold me, yeah.
Yeah. So, man, you come out of this building only to find that literally where you would normally go up to the 100th floor
Mhm.
was in complete rubble. I'm Because it's such a memory that you will probably never forget. Um, you mentioned your coworkers,
Mhm.
and you were looking for your coworkers just before kind of everything fell. Um, is there a particular coworker or set of coworkers maybe that are no longer with us that you just you remember that were you know again, like honestly, you probably the day before just thought, hey, I'll see you tomorrow,
Yeah.
and then this happens. Who's maybe somebody that you miss, that you were working with at the time that you would have never thought you wouldn't see them again? Is there anybody or a family that you want to just kind of uh give remembrance to for for such a tragic loss?
Absolutely. When I talk about this, I say, think about your two best friends at work, the ones you eat lunch with every single day, the ones that you befriend so much that you hang out outside of work. That's who I lost. And my friends were Lizzie and Rachel. They were also the only other two Dominican women at the office. They were older than me. They were young moms, so in their 30s. And we had that immediate connection. They took me under their wing. So a year in, we were just friends, and we hung out outside of work, and I knew their children. Um, the day before, I remember talking to Rachel about starting to save for her oldest son's college. And I said, okay, I'll tell you tomorrow. We'll sit down and chat, and I'll tell you everything about it, because I had gone through that experience. And that's a conversation that we never got to have. And it was excruciating to sit for over a week. I sat in front of the TV hoping that they would say Lizzie or Rachel's name have been found. And that day never came. Um, when you think about that kind of loss, you never think about your coworkers the same again. And I want to pause here and share that Rachel and Lizzie were a gift to me. And what I do is I turn around and turn that experience into a gift to everyone else I come in contact with. At work, I am extra patient with everybody. And at work, I try to be the brightest part of anyone's day, because I have seen and experienced what it is to lose everyone that you work with, that you like. And when you realize how finite life can be, then you realize, well, what is my role in this? Because my life is fleeting and quick. And if I am no longer here tomorrow, what do I want that last memory to be? For me, my friends were jovial. We laughed together. They had such great energy. I want to make sure that when people interact with me at work, that's what I bring to the table. I want you to remember me for not only did she know how to do her work well, but she did it with fun and a smile on her face. And that's how I've taken that experience and carried that energy that my friends shared with me through today.
Hey, did you know that as employees, there are 7 big mistakes that we are all making before getting fired, downsized, or laid off? And I wanted to share those with you and teach you how to level up in your career. You can get that by going to www.twac.live/7 mistakes. You and I have been making some egregious mistakes when it comes to our career, and we got to stop making them. I want to provide you with this context, things that I have learned throughout my career that are going to help you. So go to the website, twac.live/7 mistakes, put in your name and email address, and download this free PDF that'll teach you of things that you and I can stop doing and start leveling up our career. Back to the episode. The interesting thing about what you're saying is, I would imagine that many of us, right, today, because, we have our phones, right, and we have a way to kind of escape, right, while we're even at work, right? People put their headphones on, or, whatever, right? Like, we have our ways to kind of disconnect. And here you are in a world of all the technology with a high priority on actually connecting with people, which I think is important, right? I'll even think about how, right, the events of the last couple of years have even made that even more of a challenge for many people, right? And you're still looking for ways to be that bright spot, which I think is really cool in people's lives. Because I like what you said, and I think the truth is we don't know what other people are going through. We never know at work. Let's talk about months after. Share, what were some of the things that were going on for those of you who survived? What was going on with, from a company standpoint? What things did you like? What was kind of happening? And I know we had a prior conversation, but you mentioned something that I had never. I just thought was very fascinating, especially because I, like you, love organizational culture, org psychology, and human behavior. You mentioned to me this idea of work therapy. Talk to me about kind of what was happening months after. after the loss, and how did this get introduced to you? Being somebody who's going through such a traumatic, moment. Like, how did all this come about?
So it took us over a month to get back together. I remember maybe towards the end of October, one of our clients lent us their office space to just have everyone reunite, and that for the first time, because there was no place to go. There was no work. So that was super helpful to just be in the company of others that had experienced the same event from our perspective, right? So we did that, and then maybe a couple of more months after, maybe turning in the new year, or maybe that December, the company leased another space off of Lexington Avenue in around Grand Central Station. So we had a new location. Now, what happened was we had a lot of therapy available. There were open centers that if you just wanted to walk in and walk to a therapist in New York City, you could. And I took advantage of that. There were also places that you could call. And I remember calling late at night one day because I had trouble sleeping the weeks after. And the reason I had trouble sleeping is because I couldn't sleep thinking that my friends' children were trying to go to sleep without their moms. That was hard for me. So I ended up calling, a therapist on the phone that night and to help me through that. After we started getting together at work, they also made group therapy available. So during lunch, we could go and sit around a table and have a discussion. And at that table, I was sitting around with people that had seen more than I had seen, some that had seen less than I had seen. I remember one young lady had lost her mom, and they both worked in the same location, and she had lost her mom, and she was there. So we were able to do this group work therapy. Um, and it was something that I look forward to every week because, as you can imagine, doing work and pretending that this horrible thing did not happen was not going to work. And we needed to slowly but surely do work, but also take care of ourselves in the process. There were people that were chronically absent even after we got the building. And that was not me. I longed for that connection because I longed to be around the people that had experienced what I had experienced as we rebuild and put the pieces back together. That was therapeutic for me, helping the company just printing papers and files that we had. We no longer had anything. It was everything from scratch, everything was brand new. So that part was therapeutic for me. And I took advantage of the therapy that was being offered from many different places. I remember working with NRN on energy therapy as well. So I wanted to make sure that I myself was whole and complete, and that I could process everything that had happened to me because I didn't want it lingering or stopping me from living a full life because I had experienced this horrible thing.
Wow. So I'm curious, right? When it comes to work therapy, would you say that today it should be something that people look into? Why or why not?
I am actually very happy that more of us are talking about mental health in general. And mental health at the place, one of the places that I work with, has been front and center since the pandemic started because we realized that this shift of all of us going to work from home that happened in 2020 it is not normal, and people's home lives are come from many different places and looking different, so we couldn't even assume that everyone had a space where they could clear their minds and focus on work while you're worried about what is life turning like, and am I physically safe, and is my family safe. So I appreciate the conversations that are going around mental health. And I do think that the workplace is definitely a place where we should be infusing more mental health and therapy to help people process and put the pieces back together and slowly but surely come back, and try to have a life that resembles something of what we had before. I don't know, I know that different states are at different levels of opening, but I, for example, have not gone back to physical work just yet. My agency has not reopened. So thinking through, we want to reopen. I'm one of those people that actually enjoys the interactions and the conversations, but I know that not everybody's in the same mental space. And I think that that is something that workplaces, the ones that are most intuitive, that are truly trying to serve their employees in order to get great work out of them, would be open to and should infuse.
Yeah, it again, you were the first person that I actually heard talk about this idea of work therapy. Now, let me ask you this. So, you're going and you're having these meetings, right? And you're talking with a few of these therapists. Were the questions and the group conversations and coaching, were it were there things that, like, um you discussed that you didn't maybe realize were kind of connected to what you were dealing with? Were they only focused on, the tragedy of what happened in 9/11, or were you able to kind of explore, even further, just as a human being, right? Learning, coping mechanisms and all those types of things. Like, what were kind of some of the things that they explored inside of these moments of work therapy?
I think one of the key things that I remember is we were all allowed to feel our feelings and to feel each other's feelings. When I tell you that this young lady is sharing about losing her mom and seeing that moment on TV, and is a moment that we saw on TV, you have the heaviness of that moment that she's sharing. She is helping her release feelings and process through that. But we, listening to it, also get to process what we feel about that. And I think that when something tragic happens, we quickly want to get past it, maybe not talk about it, and maybe just, yes, acknowledge it, and then can we move on to the next thing. That allowed the time for pause. And it's like, no, this is not normal. Feeling all this and carrying all this is not normal. If you go around life with all that bottled up, imagine what kind of human being you are to the rest of the world, because you cannot be that pleasant, joyful person that you were created to be if you're just keeping everything bottled up inside and you never got a chance to explore what that feels like and take a moment and honor those feelings. So I think that was for me the most helpful. We also talked about things that may not have been related that we were feeling, like, let's say if you didn't have an appetite, if you didn't want to eat, like myself, I couldn't sleep at night, that all of this was related. That maybe the normal thing to do was to watch the news 24/7. Well, maybe that's not what you want to do. Maybe try turning it off, and not watching it that much. At work, some days you didn't feel like getting up and coming to it, and that was okay. Grace was going to be shown to you. On the other hand, there were some of us who work was more of a distraction. And I can tell you, I didn't get it all right in hindsight. I don't think I got it all right. I did have my escapes. We used to chat back then, and I used to love chatting with people outside of work too. And sometimes that's what I distracted myself with. I was young. I used to enjoy going to happy hours and windows on the world. That was gone. I had to reinvent how I was going to interact with my friends. So, and, the short answer is we explored our feelings, we explored things that we were feeling at the time, or behaviors that we were seeing at the time, that we in our minds didn't think might be related, but bringing it to the table there, we realized how it is related and how to get past that.
Yeah, I think that's super cool, and not only that, I agree. I do think, maybe at least the last 15 to 20 years, open conversation about work therapy has been, we're trying to normalize it. I don't think it's the norm at all right now, but I think it's trying to be normalized, right? I do think that that conversation is something that is being tossed around, right? And I will say this: I think the way to normalize it is not waiting until a tragic event happens. Because here's the thing that I guess that I'm kind of noticing when you look at um, corporate work life and the ebb and flow of work. I loved your point about, just, you see value in every coworker, right? And that you want to be a bright spot because, um, in some shape, form, or fashion, there are people that we're working with who are having their own personal 9/11 situation, right? People still lose their spouses, right? People have, I know of somebody whose, daughter died in a car accident. I know of people, right? Like they're having their own moments. And I think that the thing that maybe we don't ever think about as coworkers sometimes is like, you know, maybe the stress that they're feeling is not necessarily just tied to the amount of work that's got to get done or deliverables. It could be they're just struggling with something, right? And we've
And
made
think I'm sorry to interrupt, but think about the idea that people that we work with are people first and
exactly,
employees second.
yeah.
I remember once in the anniversary, one of the anniversaries of 9/11, I took, this is out of my norm, I emailed everyone at the agency just to let them
Mm.
know that they mattered to me, even if we didn't directly work together. That when we would pass each other on the hallway, that I took the time to smile at them and say hello because of this experience that I had lived through. I wanted them to know that they were important and that if nobody else had ever told them that, I wanted to make sure they knew that.
That is so cool, and I think that when as we look at the maturation of corporate work life, right? I do think that the understanding that everybody might be having a moment, right, um, is a collective village problem to solve. That's just my own thoughts there with that, right? So let's talk about uh, the there's the Yadira that goes through that tragedy, that gets the opportunity to be a part of group therapy sessions and continues to move forward. How then does this shape what you do next in your career? Because you were working, you know, on a path. You have this real moment in life, and I would imagine at some point you're like, well, now what do I do? Right? Like how did you get yourself into the space to go, okay, let me figure out what I want to do from here? What was that kind of journey like to be able to get you to the work you do today?
So I one of the advice, and these are the things that we discuss in therapy, is I was already thinking about graduate school. Should I just quit this, abandon ship right now and then go on and move on to the thing that I wanted to do anyway? And the advice that I received is you don't want to make those kind of decisions while you're grieving. So I allowed myself the time. I took that advice and I said, okay, I'm going to give myself time. Remember, I told you my 6 month rule. I gave myself the time. I said, okay, I can do this for 6 months. In 6 months, I can start looking into schools, applying, and get an answer, so that then by this time next year, I can start graduate school. And that's exactly what I did. I had a good time helping the company rebuild, but I didn't lose sight that I knew that's not where I wanted my career to develop. And I went ahead and applied. I looked around. I At that point there were some days that I couldn't really focus on work, and those were kind of hints at me. Not only am I dealing with what I'm dealing with, but also this is my body telling me and the universe telling me this is not for you. You're not excited naturally about this work. So I went ahead and applied. I got accepted, and on the spot I said yes, when the professor and I were talking on the phone. And that summer I got accepted and I resigned my job in August to go and move to Virginia and be there for 2 years doing my graduate program to become a strategist. The reason I chose to become a strategist is back in that time, I didn't see anybody or the brands really talking to somebody like me, a bicultural woman. having grown up here in the United States with Hispanic roots and culture ingrained, I saw people talking to my parents, the in Spanish, and I saw people talking to other Americans, but nobody in this hybrid situation. So I thought I could be the voice of the bicultural generation that I've grown up with that is now in the real world, and nobody is really talking to us. We're talking about the Latino boom, and the news are, speaking about it, but who is talking to us as consumers, and who understands our background and our story, and how they both intermingle and make us a different type of consumer. That's why I chose to become a strategist. And I've had a great time being that person, being sometimes the only person in the room that understands that experience, and shedding light to it. That's what I see my role. I shed light to things that others may not know. And I love sharing my culture and elevating my people, and figuring out how, sometimes we're more alike than different, and sometimes there are some nuances and differences that we need to take into account when we speak to one another.
Yeah, it's pretty cool because um, I think that's definitely one of the things that companies and brands are trying to normalize, right? Being able to know how to effectively communicate to someone, right? Like, I think it's a difference in just talking to people, right?
Yeah.
And hoping that everybody understands, but not everybody understands. And one of the interesting things about, you being a strategist and having the background that you do, unfortunately, I look at commercials differently today. I'm always listening for the message and kind of how they do things, right? And some of them are cool, and some of them, like, yeah, they missed it totally. But one of the interesting things I think about what you're doing and having the background that you have is that without being able to effectively communicate a message that doesn't seem, cultural generic, idea, but really gives people the opportunity to be highlighted by whoever the company, brand, or service is. I think a lot of times that adds to the attraction too, right? Like, if you can effectively communicate to somebody, right, in an authentic way that gives them the opportunity to resonate. I think it's a hidden gem, right? And very few
Well,
companies are good at that. Would you agree?
yes. Yes. And that's why I was going to say that's why companies hire ad agencies. And I come in that package. And part of the work that I do now with my own company is bringing that to the small business owner,
Mm-hmm.
because conversations like this is when many of us learn that's available to me, and I can look at things from that perspective. Think about, we're in African American History Month, right? This is when we're having this conversation. There's some hit or misses. There are things that company did with the best intention, and they just flopped. How do you ensure that your intention is carried forth and effectively shares and communicates with that audience? If you don't have a strategist that is thinking from that consumer's perspective, you can miss the point. You
Yeah.
can mess it up, So
It's very
this is
true. I'm thinking recently, a couple of weeks ago, I don't know if you saw the Adidas uh, promo that they did, and gosh, it got a huge, amount of feedback that was pretty negative. Um, but there's a lot of companies who will make the attempt, and I always tell people, listen, I give anybody credit for making the attempt.
Mhm.
Um, is it safe to say, though, that if there's a failed attempt, there's a potential that they didn't have representation in the room upon creation of that thing?
Absolutely. I say you either didn't have somebody around the table that could advise you against it, or someone advised you against it and you ignore that person at the table.
Mm, that might be probably the latter of the two. Um,
When I look at ads, I always say that's what got approved. That's what got approved. That's more often than not, that's not what got presented.
mhm. Interesting. So, talk to me about the world of strategies and how the work that you do for small business owners. What is the how does a small business owner start the journey of honestly thinking about this while they're small, right? Like, what are the things that you try to get people to understand about the value of thinking this way before your product or service becomes, hopefully the next Nike or Google or whatever, right? Like, what are some of those things that people who have a side business that, are looking to really, move their business forward and communicate an authentic message? What are some of those things that you try to give people to think about, and why there's some value in really doing this stuff, even as a small business?
So I have developed tools specifically for small business owners because it is my passion. It lights me up to help somebody else. So one of the starter things is, have you developed your audience profile? Have you really stopped to think, to answer questions from their perspective, how they interact with your industry, with your category, and with your product? Do they know your brand? Do they not know your brand? What are they reaching towards to solve that problem that your brand or your product or your service also solves? So I start there. I have, a profile template tool that anybody that signs onto my list can have. I've also developed a class. If you wanted an expert to walk you through how I do this, and I put these together for national and global brands, I am walking you through it through that class. Because I want people to be able to take advantage and to give themselves the space and opportunity to think like their consumers think. So walk in their shoes and write it down. When you have that, then you know how to create content for them. You know how to answer questions that they have. You know how to position your product in a way that it fills a void that they currently have. Unless you study the consumer in that way, unless you take the time to really develop and learn who they are, then you have a harder time. That's why you keep posting and nobody's connecting, because you don't really know what they're looking for. You haven't spent the time to really study. And there are tools that are free. I do that in my class. I teach you how to use the free tools. There are paid tools that we use in the industry, and there are free tools that we also use in the industry. So I make it very accessible for the small business owner that is starting out, to just learn it and do this on their own. And if you want to work with me one-on-one, that is available as well, where I help you research your target audience, because I know how to reach them. I know this is what I learned to do. So if that's the step that you're in, I can help you do that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, lastly, as we kind of wrap up here, Yadira, I think what you bring to the marketplace just as a human being with the experiences that you have, I think is such a valuable asset, because you're continuing to grow through what you've been through. And I think that, to me, I don't think the healing journey stops. I think it just has stages and chapters, right? So, I'm definitely grateful that you were willing to, stop by the show and kind of share your story. Right now, there's somebody listening to this episode and they're thinking, man, that is, that was either helpful to me, or I'm trying to, I'm wanting to, move forward with my life in a better way that might be positive. You talked about work therapy, which I'm just really blown away by the idea, the concept, and I hope more companies, even after hearing this episode, might, consider doing that even in their businesses, or amping up if they have it, in a version. But talk to the person right now that's listening to the episode, and leave some maybe final thoughts and some words of encouragement from your perspective, and how they should potentially, move forward.
So, one word of advice for your audience that I have is, don't forget the importance of relationship and that connection. Um, if you are building a business that has anything to do with the work that you do, that company may be your first client. You have to build those relationships and establish that connection to be able to do that. If you are building something that is completely different, you don't know how it may serve some of your coworkers. That may be an answered prayer for some of your coworkers. And again, those relationships are important, because of that. So don't lose sight of the environment that you have been placed in at the moment as you build your business. I think everything is a step to build you to where you need to be. So take advantage of that opportunity. Be wise about it. Know that nothing lasts always. So just, go through and take advantage of the opportunity now as you take the next steps to take you to where you want to be.
Awesome. 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 Well, listen, lastly, tell everybody how they can find you.
Yes, so I am most active on Instagram. You can find me at Inspira Communications, Inspira Communications with an S at the end. That's where I'm most active, sharing tips on a daily basis. So follow me there.
Awesome. Well, listen, Yadira, thank you so much for choosing to stop by, sharing with us here on the show. And man, I wish you much more success. And we'll have to have a part two of this because there's so many other things that I'd like to be able to get to, but we just couldn't bunch it all in today. But thank you so much for stopping by, and thank you for bringing such incredible value to the marketplace. And man, we appreciate you here on The World According to Chris. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.